Hey everyone. At the end of my video each week, I always try to remind investors to keep your eyes on the horizon. I started using that line during the pandemic when we were being inundated by dire news every day. And I noticed that a lot of investors were missing the big picture as they shifted their focus to the flood of micro trends that were shaping the world at the time. But even as we put the pandemic behind us, I stuck with that line. Real estate investors need to keep their eyes on the horizon because real estate usually involves an extended hold period, about 5 to 10 years on average. That's true regardless of a pandemic or surging inflation or elevated interest rates or even a steady as she goes market. So while investors need to monitor the short-term trends, a longer-term perspective and strategy is often a critical element of success. And in building that longer-term outlook, one of the most reliable metrics is demographics. And in conjunction with demographics, investors should pay particular attention to how key demographic cohorts' behavior is changing. For example, the median age of marriage is now about 29 years, whereas 20 years ago, the median age of marriage was about 25 years old. That shift, which was led by the 72.5 million millennials, changed housing demand, urbanization trends, and the space demand profile of every type of real estate. While the millennials were in their 20s, they favored the urban core and drove the live, work, play ideology. But millennials are now in their 30s and 40s, with many getting married and starting families. And that life change spurred a reinvigoration of the suburbs, weakening demand for urban real estate. A lot of investors chalk this up as a byproduct of the pandemic, but the migration trend was actually already underway in 2015. But it was a slow migration and most didn't see it. Then, when the pandemic hit, the movement to smaller cities and the suburbs accelerated. And that migration, which is similar in impact to when the baby boomers made the same trek in the 1980s and early 1990s, has dramatically affected commercial real estate. And so today, the 72.5 million people in the millennial generation, which is roughly the same size as the baby boom generation, are aged between 28 and 43 years old. And 5 years from now, they'll be between 33 and 48 years old. The reason that's important is because historically, the peak earning years are between the ages of 45 and 54 years old. And the millennial generation is literally on the cusp of aging into their prime earning years. In addition, nearly 22 million members of the Gen Z age cohort will turn 25 over the next 5 years. And there's a significant 47% jump in earnings as young adults enter their mid-20s. So, over the next 5 years, assuming the labor force participation rates remain relatively stable, the maturation of both the millennials and Gen Z into higher earning age groups should generate a substantial lift in their earnings. At the same time, the traditional loss of earnings as older generations move out of the workforce is slowing, as many in the baby boom generation will likely work well into their 60s. Just this simple aging of the population, assuming the economy remains relatively healthy, will deliver a 2% lift in personal earnings over the next 5 years. And while 2% may not sound like a lot, it would generate an additional $200 billion of income. And that's not factoring in any additional forces like population in-migration or accelerated business formation or the reshoring of manufacturing or the great wealth transfer or any of the other major trends that will lift the economy going forward. And when you consider how much of that $200 billion will be used for consumption and the multiplier effect that could have on the economy, the positive economic impact could be significant. As most of you likely already know, consumption drives about 2/3 of the US economy, which implies that the aging of millennials and Gen Z alone should give the US economy a 2% boost over that span of 5 years. And this trend should, in turn, lift space demand for all types of commercial real estate. Retail, industrial, self-storage, hotels, and housing should all benefit from the positive demographic lift. And this will be a long-term tailwind. We're just entering the leading edge of this trend now. It will actually gain momentum over the next 15 years. I think there's still a lot of pieces to figure out, like whether Gen Z will have a large enough headcount to backfill millennials in the urban core, where the millennials will ultimately lay down their roots, and whether they'll ultimately return to the office. And that's why investors need to look forward, to see past today's headlines and deeply consider the forces that will shape commercial real estate demand when you keep your eyes on the horizon.